Yeah, I can appreciate that. So, what does all this mean then when we think about where we're standing in this situation here?
So what this essentially comes down to and this is kind of reflected in surveys. So I see if you look at this survey that was conducted, this is pre-COVID, and I think there are some stats that come post-COVID. But since we're looking at hybrid work, let's look at what are the biggest benefits that employees seem to be reporting that comes out of working remotely or hybridly, where you're working some days of the week in the office, some days away from a different location. And that is this ability to have like a flexible schedule. You can work from anywhere. You don't have to commute to work. You can spend time with family. I can take up a hobby. Those 2 3 hours that you're saving from just sitting in a car or doing nothing is really valuable, and employees seem to value that quite a bit. But at the same time, there are some struggles that employees seem to have, and surveys of these employees tend to show that as well. So if we transition to the next part of the slide, you'll see that the challenges that they're talking about are the same, like loneliness, not being part of a community, not able to communicate and collaborate, the sense of not being able to unplug from work. So we see these challenges show up from being a remote worker. You have these major benefits, but you also have these downsides. And I think organizations and employees and probably key managers have to find a way to reconcile these two things, try to play up the positives while trying to play down the negatives. And in the remote work literature, we kind of see these themes recurring again and again. And I'm happy to talk more about them if we actually move on to the next slide. What we do know about remote work is that when it comes to the positives, there are three major areas that remote workers kind of hint on of what they enjoy about being a hybrid or remote worker. And the first one is having the choice of where I want to work from. And that means, well, okay, so today I might go into the office, but Thursday I'm going to work from home. There's going to be, I don't know, a rally downtown or something, and I want to be away from it. So I'm just going to stay at home. Or, my kid has a game that I can attend at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. So me staying at home is really helpful. So that sense of self-determination of where I'm going to work from, that's a huge benefit. And a lot of employees really latch onto that as a big plus side of hybrid work. Alongside that comes this ability to shift your work schedules in a way that allows you to attend to these work and non-work needs. So when you're going to an office, typically it's the but for lack of a better term, 9 to 5 is the most common work schedule that people maintain. I think what comes along with that, everybody's at work at the same time, so you have rush hour traffic, right? That means you have you have to plan your 2 3 hours before you get to work. So you're losing those 2 3 hours that you would typically have free to yourself in planning to get to work. So that means I got to wake up at 7. I got to get the kids ready. I got to get their breakfast and stuff ready. I got to take have my coffee and then drive to work in the middle of rush hour traffic. But when you have scheduling flexibility, you can kind of circumnavigate all of that. You can kind of push it all out of the way and just focus on, I'm going to wake up at this time, I'm going to start working at this time, and I don't need to drive to work. So that sense of scheduling flexibility is a big bonus that employees experience when they're working remotely, at least part of the time. And then there's also this work-related flexibility. If you're away from the watchful eye of the manager or your colleagues who are interrupting you, then you can determine how you want to get the work done. Whereas if you are in an office the whole time and you have employees coming and knocking on your door, your colleagues knocking on your door, or your manager saying, I need you to do it this way or that way, that is sort of like a big issue when it comes to choosing how you want to get your work done. So these are like the key things that managers want to keep in mind when they think about what are the upsides and how they can be applied to employees. And as I discussed earlier, the downsides to remote work are largely professional and social isolation. Professional isolation being, excluded from informational networks when managers simply do not see employees in the office. They're out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. So it's unlikely that they would remember to include them in conversations. There might be decisions that are being made at the team level, but you're not part of that team, because you're away, so you weren't included in that conversation. You have that, and then the social isolation element is you miss out on these social activities, these informal chats that are typically, how you build your friendships when you see him in the office, in the kitchen, having his lunch, and you walk by like, hey, what you getting to get talking about, what they did, and oh, I do that too. Maybe we can have we can get together, and that's how you build those relationships. So you're missing out on all of those things when you're working at least away from the office a couple of days of the week. So kind of want to keep these two cents of pluses and minuses in mind as a manager, so you can really hone in on which aspects need to be played up and which need to be played down. So yeah, as the literature is pretty clear on these benefits that you get from working remotely or hybrid for a couple of days of the week. You have these flexibility benefits that come up, and at the same time, the same remote work that's providing these benefits in terms of flexibility is also giving these detriments that are taking away from you, and that's the sense of isolation that you get. And funnily enough, we see that isolation plays out even if you're working 1 day a week away from the office. People tend to feel isolated. It's not just that folks who are spending all 5 days away from the office. So let's say it's a team of 4 and one guy or girl is spending all 5 days away. Actually shows up even for folks who are spending a day away from the office. That sense of disconnect, because I don't know, maybe it's fear of missing out. There could be all kinds of things that are happening psychologically. But we see that these negatives really play out for folks who are even working a day away from the office. And similarly, we see the benefits playing out even if you have that 1 day. That 1 day I'm at home, I'm going to be really productive because I can just ignore all these hassles. So we know that there are key benefits and there are key detriments that come from remote work. And these in turn really predict how effective employees can be. The benefits really drive positive, really increase performance and effectiveness, and the detriments really take away from it. And in many ways, these two kind of cancel each other out. So what you really want to do as a manager is you want to enhance the positives while trying to, reduce the negatives as much as possible. That way you're maximizing the effectiveness of your employees in a remote environment. And the literature, actually, if you go to the next slide, really shows this. So all your upsides from increased flexibility, you have better work-life balance, you're more productive, you're more engaged, you have more satisfaction, reduced stress. The exact positives are reflected in the negatives. So you have worse work-life balance, you're less productive, you have lower engagement. So the key benefits that you're getting tend to be from increased flexibility, tend to be taken away from increased isolation. So really what managers need to focus on is trying to enhance that sense of flexibility while also reducing that sense of isolation, because you can keep getting these upsides while minimizing these downsides.
Yeah. Would some even think when you say that they cancel each other out, that we shouldn't be thinking about hybrid work? What do you think about that? Is there value in having managers really manage the upsides and minimize the downsides and go to all that effort?
I tend to think that hybrid work is here to stay. I think the idea of having to be in the office 5 days a week, for certain jobs is absolutely necessary. Like a doctor is not going to conduct remote surgery. I don't think we have the technology available for that yet. But in many ways, there are a lot of jobs that actually allow for increased efficiency, even when you're working in a hybrid environment. So what we do know is, despite these things, the downsides and the upsides coming out from the literature, that remote workers on average are more productive, are more efficient, are more happy with their jobs, are more likely to stay, are going to be more committed, are less likely to get burned out than employees who are spending traditional 5 days in the office. So we know that there are big upsides, and this is I'm actually part of a study that is taking stock of over 111 studies conducted in the remote work literature. We're putting it all together, looking at all the results from these different studies. So we have about 300,000 people. So looking at results from 300,000 people, we know that there are clear benefits to remote work. And by remote work, I'm talking about hybrid working arrangements, where it's not just employees spending the whole time away from the office. We're looking at the range, the more time you spend away from the office versus just 1 or 2 days away from the office. And in general, what we're seeing is that there are key upsides to it, both in terms of employee outcomes, where employees are satisfied and they have better work and life and family outcomes. But organizations are also benefiting when they see employees not turning over as much. Their employees are more committed, they're more engaged, they're more productive. So I think it's not that managers should think about it as, why should we even deal with remote work when employees are productive? I think managers should approach it as, okay, so this seems to be working. How do we make it better? And how do I get it to a point where my employees and I can really work together as a unit, despite where they're working? Like, is location really what's stopping us from being the best versions of ourselves? And I think if you approach it from that standpoint, you can really address some of these downsides and really highlight the upsides.
Yeah.